So I'm finally starting to figure it out. I'm finally starting to understand why players, young stars, are leaving the States in droves. I'm starting to see why when players get that first offer from not even a Big Five European club, it can be a club from the Netherlands, like the Montreal player, Georgie. Excuse me if I pronounce his last name wrong, but Georgie. I'm not even gonna say his last name. Georgie from Montreal. This is a huge loss for Montreal, and I really believe that it's going to affect their playoff run. Yeah. You need good players in this playoffs. Philly is going to be a tough team to play. NYCFC, they're going to be tough to play. You see the resurgence of Miami. We see the resurgence of Columbus. So the loss of Georgie from Montreal, that's going to be a huge loss. But I understand why he's leaving. Players want flexibility, they want options, and they want freedom. Players do not want to be held bondage to a league and multiple clubs. One of the reasons why I don't talk about the MLS salary system and how they handle players, the reason why I don't talk about it a lot because it is so complex, it is so difficult. But one thing I do know, MLS has a strong hold on players. They have a strong hold on their salaries. They have a strong hold on their flexibility. Like you hear about American sports fans. You hear about NFL free agency. You hear about NBA free agency, but you really don't hear much about MLS free agency. Why? It's because the MLS dictates where players can play within their league. The MLS has a strong hold on determining where players can play within the league. Players don't have much freedom to play where they want to play. And before, I didn't understand that. I didn't know this was going on. This is why a lot of young American stars are fleeing to Europe and other countries. Because in other leagues, they don't have a strong hold on player salaries and determining what team they can play for within those leagues. When their contract is up with one team within that league, they can negotiate with their agent on where they want to play next. Correct me if I'm wrong now, European fanboys. The way that the MLS has a strong hold on players is not like that in other global soccer leagues like in Europe and South America and Mexico. If I'm wrong, please correct me in the comment section. But there has to be some form of freedom. There has to be some form of flexibility. There has to be some opportunity for players to have options of where they want to play and how much money they can make in Europe. Because if that didn't exist, a lot of these players would just stay in America. Because they'll be like, well, what's the point of me going over there if I don't have freedom to play where I want to play and the flexibility to negotiate a contract that I believe that I'm worth, rather than a league dictating how much I should make. If those options wasn't available, if that freedom wasn't available in Europe, they wouldn't be flying over there, going over there in droves. So now with the information that I'm starting to get, I'm starting to understand why Tati Castellanos wanted to leave. I'm starting to understand why Daryl Dike wanted to leave. I'm starting to understand why the New England players wanted to leave. I'm understanding why Vela was seriously considering leaving LAFC. It's all starting to make sense now. MLS, you have a strong hold on your league. You have to let players, executives, and coaches, you have to give them flexibility to do their job. Players need to be able to have the opportunity to negotiate their deal and to determine their worth and their value, and not you determining their worth and their value. So with that being said, it was reported by Sam Stejskal of The Athletic that there has been changes to the MLS homegrown rule, and that players will be able to play for clubs that's outside of their region. Like before, with the MLS homegrown rule, like players who were like signed to MLS Academy teams, MLS Next, MLS Next Pro, they couldn't leave. They couldn't go play for another team if they weren't getting playing time for the specific team they're on, or if they just flat out didn't like being on that club. They just didn't have that opportunity to get up and leave. Now, they still can't really do that, but there's opportunities for them to leave. It's just if a club is interested in them, they will have to negotiate some type of deal. And it's not only for the protected players, it's just the players on the roster, even the unprotected players. Like, even if they want to leave, like the new club that they're going to, that new club will have to give the former club some type of money. So it's still some form of stranglehold. There's still some form of bondage that the MLS still have on these players, but they're slowly they're slowly taking a step in the right direction. Now let me break some pieces of this article down. First of all, 54 protected players. Why so many players? How many players out of this 54 is actually going to get playing time on a consistent basis? Now, I don't watch too much MLS. I don't watch any MLS Next. I don't watch any MLS Next Pro. I don't watch any MLS Academy games. Me personally, I'm just not too interested in developmental leagues. Developmental leagues are really for scouts and I guess people who are interested in seeing who will potentially be the next big American star that ends up transferring to Europe. But for me personally, I'm not into developmental leagues. So when I see this number 54, how many players throughout the season of these protected 54, how many of them actually get legitimate playing time on a consistent basis during MLS Next and MLS Next Pro season? How about the MLS implement a transfer portal for the Next and the Next Pro guys? Give them some form of flexibility like college football. In college football, it used to be a time where players didn't have the freedom to just get up and leave whenever they didn't want to be there for the specific college. And their college football fate was at the palm of coaches and administration. This is the situation that a lot of these young MLS players are in. Their destiny is held at the palm of the MLS. How about the MLS implements a transfer portal where players can freely choose where they want to play? Because the thing about all these protections and these restrictions, it just makes it easy for these guys, for these coaches and these organizations to scout players. And it causes them to be lazy. It doesn't motivate them to get up and go and scout for great players nationwide. It just motivates them to stay in their little old comfort zone, recruit recruit a local player in their area, but without legitimately determine if they have the best players on their roster. So I'm going to read a few pieces from the article that I took out of it. 54 players on their youth player protected list. The new system will be based around a protected list of youth players. MLS teams will be allowed to place up to 54 players on their youth player protected list, 45 who play in their academy, and 9 who aren't in their academy, but who live in their homegrown territory. Those players will not be able to sign a professional deal with another MLS club without that club negotiating a trade for their rights. I don't like that idea. Free the players. These are not, they're developmental players. Developmental players should not be held bondage. If that's the case, it'll be better off if they just go to college. Get their NIL deal, live off of that NIL deal for a couple years. Do what Danny Trejo did. Go to college, then enter the MLS Super Draft. Then you get drafted by a professional team. Then you end up playing most likely for MLS Next or MLS Next or a USL Championship team before you eventually play for the team that you really wanted to play for. I wonder if these players currently have agents. Like, how does the agent system work in the MLS? Players who are rostered to a club's academy or are not on the protected list can move to another club's academy and eventually sign homegrown deals with that club's first team. But the players' new clubs will have to pay their old clubs a set amount in order to acquire them. Those amounts have already been determined by the league and are not subject to negotiation. So they're kind of in a similar situation as the protected. Because the new clubs will still have to pay the old clubs some kind of financial agreement, they have to have some kind of financial agreement before that player that's on the new team can officially play for that team. So there's still some form of bondage right there. Under the new rules, players who live in an MLS homegrown territory but are neither rostered to an MLS academy nor on a homegrown priority list will now be able to move freely to MLS clubs based outside of their territory. Teams will not have to pay any compensation to other MLS teams for said players. Now, this is what I like right here. This is the freedom right here. So you're going to have a lot of good players who are going to opt out of joining any MLS academy. And just so they can have that freedom. But does the MLS force players to be on that homegrown priority list? That's the question that I have right there. Like, if the MLS randomly puts your name on that homegrown priority list, are you basically stuck? Is there anything you can do about it? Maybe the top high school players, the top young players may have to get some kind of lawyer involved in this. Because the fact that players who are not rostered to an MLS academy or the ones that are not on a homegrown priority list, they have that freedom to negotiate their own deals and to determine their own destiny. Their destiny is not restricted to MLS decision makings. So how is this homegrown priority list, like, how is it created? And before the list becomes official, do they notify the players and let them know that, hey, this is the MLS, we're considering to put you on the priority list. Do you accept or you decline? Do they have an option of accepting to be on that priority list? Or the MLS just automatically puts them on that priority list without them having an option to accept or decline? That's the question that needs to be asked. Young soccer players in middle school and high school, this is something that you need to find out. how is this priority list created, and whether or not you have an option to accept or decline. If you have an option to accept or decline being on that list. Because if not, you may have to get a lawyer involved. Because I don't like the idea of players not having an option to play where they want to play, especially young players, like those who are in middle school and high school. I don't like the idea of a league telling them you're gonna play in our league and we're gonna tell you where you're going to play. I don't like the thought of that. Lastly, the new rules are a departure from geographically dictated system that MLS has used for years. In the current setup, every team has a designated homegrown territory in which they have the MLS rights to every youth player. MLS teams can take players into their academy from the territories of other teams, but the player's home team still holds his MLS rights and can block him from signing a homegrown deal with another MLS club. So, yeah, the league still has a lot of work to do. And the original homegrown rules is the reason why a lot of players have rushed to Europe. So, this is a developing story, and this is something that I'll talk more about in the off season. The MLS, you need to remove some change. You need to remove some bondage from players, from investors, from coaches. There needs to be more flexibility in just the business culture of your league. It's like you're authoritarian. That's what it's like. It's like you're an authoritarian over the teams, over the players, over the coaches, over the general managers. And this has to be a reason why a lot of people within this league is flocking to Europe.